Hello, students and families from Capistrano Unified. I see a few folks coming in. We'll get started in just a few seconds. I want to make sure that our friends, neighbors, students can join us this evening. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone is here and doesn't miss out on any of the important information we're going to be sharing tonight. So I'll wait on another maybe 15 seconds. Okay, I think we can get started. So welcome students, families, community members, and to our wonderful presenters for joining us this evening. I am Monica Cabrera. I am a CUSD Futureology College and Career Counselor. Tonight you are joining us for our final event, part of our CUSD Virtual College Fair for 2021. I am so grateful and excited to have you all join us tonight to hear about this wonderful topic. And tonight you all will hear from some wonderful experts, including Sung from Arizona State University, Taylor and from Purdue University, and Nicole from CollegeWise. So I will let them just a minute introduce themselves so you all can know a little bit more about them and we can get started. But before we get started, I do want to go over a few logistical things. So tonight you are here to hear the presentation, STEM's Many Branches, College Planning for Students Interested in Majors in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. A mouthful, but definitely a lot of information that you will learn today. So some logistical things. So this session will be recorded and posted on our website and our YouTube channel so that you can view it at a later time. This will be available later on this month. Your video and mic are completely off. We cannot see or hear you. The way that you can interact with us is through the Q&A. So I will ask that if you do have questions to put them in the Q&A. Also, I will ask a favor that if you can please, if possible, hold on to your questions till to the very end so that you can hear all the wonderful information before we jump into the questions. We also ask that you will receive a follow-up email with a survey asking you about your experience with this session. If you can please provide some feedback, that would be great so that we can learn more about how to improve future events. So with that being said, I want to welcome Nicole, Taylor, and Sung to present on this wonderful and interesting topic.
Thanks, Monica. It's always so good to be here with our friends at Capo Valley. My name is Nicole Pilar, and I am a CollegeWise counselor based in our Irvine office. A little bit of my background: I graduated from Pitzer College, a member of the Claremont Colleges. I worked for a couple of years with the U.S. State Department on a Fulbright grant, teaching English and doing college counseling for students in Bulgaria. I've now been back in the United States for going into my 6th cycle with CollegeWise, and I do not have a degree in sciences, but all of my siblings are in biological or physical sciences. So this is a topic that I love presenting with my friends from Purdue and ASU on because we have so many students here in this area that are interested in this. So, well, we hope that it will be helpful and useful. Taylor, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor Patterson. I am the Assistant Director of Admissions at Purdue. I am a regionally based employee. I live in Long Beach. This is my 5th recruitment cycle as well. I have been on the Purdue team for a little bit now. I read specifically for the College of Engineering and the Honors College this year. Sung, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Sung An. I'm a first-year recruitment coordinator for ASU. In California. I'm based in LA. There are six admissions counselors at ASU. Grew up in Southern California in the South Bay area near Torrance, and I attended and graduated from Indiana University with a degree in economics. And I have several family members that are involved in the STEM one way or another. So I'm really glad to be able to hopefully share some information that you'll find useful tonight.
Can we have the next slide, please, Monica? So to give you a quick overview as to what we hope you will leave here today knowing is we want to start off with a deep dive definition of what STEM means at the collegiate level. Students, I think, sometimes have an understanding of STEM at the high school level, but not necessarily seeing what that looks like at the collegiate level. We also want to talk a little bit about what STEM education looks like in college within the different programs and within the different letters in the acronym. Also, STEM programs have historically been treated differently in the admissions process. And, fortunately, again, we have Purdue and ASU here to kind of talk a little bit about those differences. And then kind of talk a little bit more about how students can best prepare and how counselors can assist students with, that are interested in applying to STEM-based programs. Monica, next slide, please. So what is STEM? STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Many students we find tend to focus on the science and the engineering, but kind of maybe don't really know about technology or mathematics, or maybe think that those aren't necessarily paths for them. One of the coolest parts of STEM is just how flexible it is. And we kind of created this presentation initially because a lot of students out there seem to feel very limited in STEM. And so hopefully as we kind of go through each of these acronyms, students, you'll be able to see just how much you can do with various aspects of STEM. Next slide, please, Monica. So this is a great graphic that Taylor, was sharing with us from Purdue, and it uses the idea of ice cream, right? So I think for a lot of students, they don't necessarily see just how much complexity there is just with something as simple as ice cream. So in the College of Science, for instance, if a student is looking at ice cream, the lens that they may be seeing that from is identifying the elements of the ingredients, looking at, the ratio between fat and sugar content, for instance. Whereas in the College of Engineering, they're going to be looking at, okay, how can we create original recipes and batches, and how do we make sure that it's consistent so that way the consumer maybe has a great, awesome experience with ice cream every time they dive into that carton. And then technology is really looking at how do we take all of these amazing, ingredients and recipes and mass produce this? And how do we develop those new flavor recipes based on that initial recipe? How can we take this idea that came from our scientists and our engineers and replicate it on a mass scale? And so when looking at STEM, I think one of the things that students is beneficial is to consider the different ways that you look at different problems. One of the things that we talk a lot about in admissions is just how STEM is really a team sport. Nobody wins a Nobel Prize without thanking somebody else. No product is really created without working in a team environment, particularly in the sciences. And so it's important to kind of, when you imagine yourself in college, what element of the team or what lens do you want to kind of be looking at that problem or within that organization? This is where looking at the majors can be helpful to kind of identify that. Next slide, please, Monica. So kind of starting off with science, I think for a lot of students, their exposure to science is limited maybe to specific disciplines. So things like biology, chemistry, and physics. But in college, again, it's so much more interdisciplinary, and that's partly because of the resources that you will see at the collegiate level. And so when I am advising students, the thing that I'm really asking them to consider is, well, what problems are you interested in? What types of things are grabbing your interest? So for instance, I have a student that is really passionate about astrobiology. She is fascinated with trying to understand what are the conditions for life on other planets. And so she's actually going to be doing some planetary science. She might be doing some geology. She's of course going to be taking biology classes. Forensic science, for instance, is you're going to be taking some chemistry. You're also going to be taking some criminology, some sociology classes, and really understanding what are the tools that you need to solve crime. So it's not just, maybe going out as a police officer, but really looking at the science behind solving things like DNA or fingerprint analysis, stuff like that. Entomology is another great example of an interdisciplinary major. I think a lot of students don't realize just how important bugs are. Entomology is the study of bugs. And so thinking about how, especially here in California, agriculture is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so entomologists actually are very highly in demand for their skills of being able to understand both food production, but how can we make sure that the types of pests are out there are not pestering too much, so to speak. Crop science, these are examples from Purdue, is another great kind of more agricultural focused science that's, again, lots of biology, lots of chemistry, but kind of thinking about where is the applicability with that in that major. And then of course, speech and hearing science for students that maybe want to go into a school site setting, maybe work with students that have speech and hearing disabilities, you'll be learning quite a bit of biology. There's going to be quite a bit of understanding of the brain function and what happens there, psychology, and then of course, certainly child development classes. And so students, I think when you're looking at each of these acronyms, particularly when it comes to science, because it is so incredibly flexible, that's one of the benefits of the S and the STEM aspect of the acronym is you can really kind of combine and tailor your interests. And you'll see when you start looking at college, the list of majors potentially within a college of science, just how varied and how specific you can be depending on the type of interest area that you have. Next slide, please, Monica. Passing off to Taylor.
Yes, I am going to talk about technology this evening, and technology is another one of those programs where students may not have a lot of experience from an academic standpoint in high school, but of how much of everything that we use day to day is really in this realm. A lot of the programs in the College of Technology or technology programs are going to be engineering focused. You'll see electrical engineering technology. In a few slides, we'll look at the overlap of other engineering technology programs. And then less common major examples, I think of audio engineering technology. I think all of us are excited to go to a concert, and how does the layout affect the stage and affect the crowd of hearing the music. I know that we've all been in webinars and whatnot where you can't hear the speaker and you have to say more than just you're muted, but the actual audio information that goes into that. Construction management and technology, if you want to learn how to build buildings at Purdue, specifically the construction management technology program has a 100% job placement rate, and students really get their labs are building things and then breaking them and see how they break. We have a lab on campus that is essentially a graveyard for buildings, and the students can see how this metal bent under this kind of impact of an earthquake, right? Food science and technology, another one. I want to throw out some of the other majors kind of in the realm of technology that are both at ASU and at Purdue, revolving around planes. We both have flight programs, I believe, but also you think of, yes, we need people to fly the planes, but we also need the people to help fix the planes. We're going to need the people that are working for the specific airlines, of managing the airlines, as well as an airport management. I would never want to see the algorithm of number one, how to schedule all those pilots and flight attendants on the thousands and thousands of flights each and every day. And then also managing the layout of an airport. You think of all the people, all the gates. I know that you've probably flown out of LAX and how massive just the coming and going of people are, that this is truly another one where it is just kind of a click hole of things. I'll highlight a few other programs kind of in that realm of technology too. Cybersecurity, if you're interested in something that is going to become more and more apparent in our daily lives, of you think of data breaches and hackers and the dark web, things like that. Also, you think of game development and design. If you want to use a video game to tell a story and then have the users play a game as well. Computer infrastructure and network engineering technology. If you think of at school, you have your school email address, and how does that system intertwine individually and then also as a full network as well. Organizational leadership is one that I actually studied when I was a student at Purdue, and kind of taking that group think and psychology efforts along with the career settings as well. So I'll jump into the next slide, diving into engineering. Kind of when you think of STEM, engineering is the one with fireworks and is in gold and has glitter and sprinkling all about it. The really common majors in engineering of what I hear a lot are, I want to go into mechanical engineering. That's going to be where students are designing, they're constructing the actual machines that do things. Electrical engineering, where you're dealing the technology of electricity. So whether you're working on devices or systems from tiny microchips, you think of what's in our cell phone, all the way to huge power station generators. Civil engineering, that's going to be anything that we essentially build, that built environment. So whether you think of a road, a bridge, a canal, an airport, again, for that connection to the less common major examples I would throw in are going to be robotics engineering. So we all know that robots are becoming more and more apparent as technology is improving each and every day. So those robots, but also the robot systems. You think of how to make a car. It's not kind of that assembly line that Mr. Ford was going through back in the day, that these are machines that are essentially building these cars. Environmental engineering is growing more and more of you thinking of soil science, biology, and chemistry, and you're focusing on solving solutions to these environmental problems. Nuclear engineering, and these engineers are looking at the processes and systems to derive benefits from nuclear energy, another area that is very much growing. They've actually increased the number of students at Purdue studying this program. And then lastly, biomedical engineering, of applying the application of biology into that realm of medicine. Again, and engineering is another one where you think that it is such a broad topic when you dive in deeper of the careers and the focuses and how you implement other STEM fields into this realm of engineering, that the opportunities are truly endless. Next slide, please. This is the slide that I was referencing of the overlap between engineering and technology. This is a very Purdue specific slide, as these listed on the left side are the 14 engineering technology programs, and then the 15 engineering programs at Purdue. We do have 17. I did not include interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary in that list, but the bolded words you can see are the overlap of those programs. That it's kind of like how you're looking at these engineering principles. And if you want to go to the next slide, is a great representation of, number one, the accreditation overseer of these engineering and engineering technology programs, but also kind of what the engineering technology students in their careers are doing a little bit more than the engineering students, and vice versa. If these students that are studying engineering technology and engineering are having engineer in their title in a job, they're just looking at engineering principles a little bit differently. Very, very short explanation of this would be the engineering technology students are going to be the ones that want to make something better. It's already been built. They have it in their hand. How can we make this better, faster, stronger? And looking at it also in the masses of how can we produce a lot of these. The engineering programs are going to be very theoretical based. You're diving into these mathematical processes a little bit more in depth, and they're focusing on creating something that is new. Of how do we design a rocket, and then once that rocket comes back, the engineering technology teams can really dive in of how can we make this better. I'm going to dive into the next slide as well that goes into the similarities and differences a little bit more. So we have the manufacturing engineering program that is more technology based, and then the mechanical engineering, that Bachelor of Science in Engineering. You can see the highlighted words a little bit that are diving into the focuses. The manufacturing are going to be kind of that more tech focused program of how do I make many of these? How do I make a lot of these? And then that mechanical engineering of how do I design and build and then control this, and really the principles of that theoretical, both math and science principles invested in this type of degree. I think this shows to the differences in these degrees, but also kind of the interconnectedness of really doing some soul searching of what are you truly interested in from a curriculum standpoint, because yes, they're in the same realm, but they truly are different. I am going to pass the microphone off to Sung now with the next slide.
All right, and so we come to the last letter of STEM, of the acronym, M standing for mathematics. And so when you're looking at math programs, math majors, the obvious one that you see is mathematics as a common major. So everything from studying geometry, linear algebra, these foundational skills, they can be applied to other majors such as statistics and economics. So you're using mathematical tools and mathematical thinking as part of those programs. And in the second list of less common major examples, you're basically going to see how the programs that you're seeing here are going to be applications of math. They're going to be more transdisciplinary in nature. So for instance, with data science, you're taking some skills in statistics and linear algebra as in order to make models that you can use to compile data, to make projections on things. There's in preparation for various types of careers. You also have financial mathematics and statistics, where you're where if you were to go into the financial field or investment banking world, you'd be able to utilize those tools there. Actuarial science is a unique program that is available at some at schools such as ASU, where you're basically looking at the measurement of risk and reward. So you're looking at you're looking at numbers to determine. Actuaries are going to be utilizing math to determine risk and reward as they're figuring out how much insurance premiums should be, or pensions, how they should be divvied out if you were to once you were to work and determine what plans you want to get into. So a lot of the programs here in the math side, they're going to be learning about the foundational elements as well as the transdisciplinary applications. Next slide, please. So ultimately, now that you've heard a little bit about each area, choosing the right program for you, here are some questions that you can use here to that you can ask yourself in order to see what that right fit is going to be. And so with science, you're going to be wondering how and why does this work? So or in tech, and so again, just those different elements, whatever perspective that you wish to take in answering questions, the things you want to look at for these careers, or what you want to study in school. Be able to look as you go into these different mid-degree programs, look at them and check the curriculum before you apply. Look at the major maps of that are offered at many universities. You can see what types of courses that are being offered and what they're going, and the specific areas that they're going to go into. You can even contact professors as part of looking at these courses, and you could get a deeper dive into what types of problems that they're going to be answering there. And now I'll pass this back to Nicole.
Thanks, Sun. So I think one thing that's also important, Sun highlighted this, is just how critically important it is to look at curriculum. I see a lot of students, for instance, this is a non-STEM example, but I have a lot of students that tell me, I don't like math, but I want to study business. Well, spoiler, you're going to be taking probably up to at least the second year of calculus for math, the math there. And so I think when students are looking at what opportunities are available within STEM, you'll hear a few different potential degree options. And some of the common ones are BA and BS. So BA stands for Bachelor of Arts. BS stands for Bachelor of Science. We also saw BSc, Bachelor of Science and Engineering earlier. And I think sometimes students will say, well, how can it be really a science degree if it's a BA? And that's totally false. You absolutely will still do science with a BA. Just the focus and the type of experience that a student will have in a BA versus a BS program will be different. So if we look at like the chemistry BA, one of the noticeable differences is that it's not going to have as many, historically speaking, not as many math and science courses as part of the major map or the course curriculum. So a BA is a perfect option for a student that doesn't want to spend all their time in a lab. Maybe they have an other interest. Maybe they're really interested in chemistry, but they also are fascinated with Scandinavian studies, and they want to go do like geothermal energy or something in Norway. Okay, that's cool. You probably are going to need to know a little bit about Norwegians if you want to do that, right? So I think with a BA, it's a great opportunity for a student that maybe wants to double major, because again, the requirements to get a BA are maybe not going to be as intensive as a BS program. Whereas a BS, if we look at the description here, you're going to find a lot more emphasis on math and science courses. So a student, that really is like, I want to go all in on chemistry. I want that to be the focus of my year. Maybe I'll have time for a minor. They should probably take a BS. But that's also, again, not to say that you can't do that with a BA as well. Sometimes you'll see, for instance, I went to a university that only offered Bachelor of Arts, but out of my friend group, 2 of them got fully funded PhD programs because one is in chemistry and the other is in neuroscience. Both were chem and bio majors at the undergrad level. And so just because you get a BA doesn't mean you can't go on and do science-based programs. I think this is where I tell students, it's also about the opportunities you took advantage of. In the instance of both friends from my friend group, they were in lab starting their freshman year. They really had a resume that showed the applicability of what they were learning in the classroom. So I think students, when you're looking at the programs that a school offers, and sometimes at places like Purdue and ASU, you will have a BA and a BS option, which is awesome, because let's say you get on campus and you realize, I don't know if I want to do the BS. Like, this is just a lot of time under a microscope, literally, maybe. I think I still want to do chemistry, but I want to do chemistry. And I started taking this international relations class that's super interesting. And maybe I want to do environmental policy or something as a result. You do have options. And so I would encourage students to, again, be looking at the requirements for that major as a way of determining, how much of that type of program do you really want? And that can also make you feel more confident in the choice that you are making when you go there. Next slide, please. So let's talk about, so you want to go into STEM. What is the best way to prepare? Historically speaking, this will depend on the selectivity of the institution to some extent. The more selective the institution, the more demanding you will see in terms of what they'd like to have. But generally speaking, you want to be taking a demanding math and science curriculum. This is 4 years of math, potentially including calculus, depending on the school. For instance, Cornell engineering they have specific requirements. They want to see a student that has taken certain coursework. Physics is a noticeable one. You want to take 3 years of science. I see a lot of students, particularly that want to study biology, that decide they only want to do bio and chem, maybe they want to do anatomy, and then they want to do AP bio. Nope, you will see an entire physics sequence as part of a bio major. And most schools are going to want to make sure that you have exposure to the holy trinity of biochem and physics, which I think is important. The other thing I always like to tell students as well is don't neglect your other coursework. Like I mentioned, STEM is a team sport. We live in a very global society. If you're planning on going and working at Google, it's a fair bet that there are going to be at least 3 members on your team of 8 that are maybe not even in the United States or not even, American citizens. They come from different backgrounds. And so it's really important to be taking those 4 years of English and be challenging yourself, particularly if you're somebody that wants to, go and win a Nobel Prize. Maybe you're like, I want to cure different types of cancers. Well, being able to write really well and be able to convince people to give you money to do research is going to be really, really, really critical. Maybe you're somebody that wants to do environmental science. Well, you're probably going to need to be able to convince, potentially governments to give you money to do that type of research. And so, doing social studies and taking foreign language and having those electives are going to make you a better scientist in some ways. And so I think it's really important, students, that when you are preparing academically, that we don't ignore the non-science classes, because those can be just as useful when you ultimately do go at the collegiate level. I believe, Sung, you had some stuff you wanted to add potentially to this.
Yes, thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so if we go to the next slide, just going into our application process, this slide just shows that we accept 3 types of applications. You can apply directly through the ASU website and through either the common application or the coalition application. The next slide will also show you specific requirements for admission. So with ASU, so in line with what Nicole said, we do want to see that students have a comprehensive academic background. We want to see that students have challenged themselves academically and have performed at a reasonably high competency level. So for us, our requirements are going to be fairly similar to what you might see in the A through G requirements. We do require that extra year of math and extra year of lab science. We do start at Algebra 1. So if you've taken that in 8th grade, you will get credit for having had that year of math once you take geometry during your 9th grade year, for instance. But otherwise, we want to see that, particularly with math and lab science, ASU will evaluate those courses in mind, especially in certain specific cases. So on the next slide, you'll actually see our requirements for engineering. So we do expect that students meet those math and science requirements. We do want to be sure that students have completed at least 4 years of math and 3 years of lab science. They cannot have any deficiencies in either area. And what's also unique to us is the fact that students can fulfill the math and science requirements through test scores. So in the case of math and science, you can actually qualify with having a minimum score on the SAT or ACT section of math, or if you've taken community college courses, like say if you've gone to Saddleback College and you took a math course over there, you could also fulfill the math requirement there. So this goes for all of our engineering programs within the Fulton Schools of Engineering, computer science, all of those programs. So theoretically, you could come to ASU having just taken trigonometry and pre-calculus by the time you graduate from high school. I would highly recommend you to take calculus so you have that preparation, as that's an important class that all of our engineering students would take during their first year in college. But in terms of the 3 years of science, yes, that holy trinity of biochemistry and physics is going to be essential there, as in order to provide you with that foundational background as you enter college. And so on that right-hand column there, a 3.0 GPA in your core coursework. In these subjects that can fulfill your that will guarantee you admission into all of our programs. We are test optional, but you can also be granted admission if you have a qualifying test score. So there you'll see the 1210 on the SAT or a 24 on the ACT. The 1210 on the SAT is actually higher than our general admission requirements of having an 1180 for admission. And I will pass it back to Taylor to talk about Purdue's requirements.
Perfect. This is how to apply to the university. First and foremost, the only way to apply is through the Common App. We also have a supplemental application that includes 2 short essay questions. They are why Purdue and why your major. We also put a lot of ownership on the student during this process, as students can self-report their grades, test scores, and English proficiency if they are a citizen of a non-English speaking country. And we do require the main 650-word essay, as well as the application fee. In regards to test scores, we have adopted a test flexible policy that was in place last year and this year. And what our verbiage is we prefer to see test scores if students do have them. But if a student their application will still be considered complete with or without test scores. And then the $6 app fee or applicable fee waiver that is done through the Common App is how an application is considered complete. If you could go to the next slide. This is going to be the Purdue, it's listed as the Purdue engineering requirements, but this is actually our systems check from a curriculum standpoint that we need every student to fulfill. We do require the 8 semesters of English and math. We require 3 years of science and social studies, and then 2 years or 4 semesters of a world language. To be competitive for the engineering program, as well as the computer science program, the professional flight program, and nursing program, I would encourage all students to max out and take 4 years of science, making sure that student has some experience with chemistry. In regards to math, it's pretty common that the curriculum is up senior year to pre-calculus. A majority of the students are beyond that kind of capacity. If it becomes a question for any of you juniors or sophomores that are here tonight of senior year, do I have the option of taking statistics or calc? Take calculus. Nicole does a really good job of explaining the differences between statistics and calculus. So I would note to her at the end of this slide of going into that example, but we have our John Fisher over in the College of Science, and he says friends don't let friends take statistics their senior year unless they're also enrolled in calculus, of really maximizing those academic courses, because with any program in the realm of STEM, it's going to create a really solid foundation in high school that you will just build off of. in college. At Purdue, we do not have any automatic admission with certain scores or whatnot like ASU does. We take a holistic approach. So we're looking at every single piece of that application puzzle. We're looking at the rigor of courses, the grades in courses, the relevant coursework to your major. That's why I encourage students really maxing out on those math and science courses, as well as academic trends. You'll notice that I did not say your GPA. We don't look at your GPA as part of the application review process because schools can look at the GPA and recalculate them 10 million different ways. Your academic story, freshman, sophomore, and junior year, and what classes you're taking your senior year is better summed up than just a 3-digit number, right? We're also looking at your responses to those 3 essays. We want to know what you've been doing outside of those classroom hours in regards to those extracurricular activities, whether they are a club, an organization, a sport, you having a job, you're doing your own research. The pandemic was a little bit of an interesting time of anything that you can really quantify, whether it's teaching yourself how to play the ukulele over YouTube, or whether you were watching an elderly family member that was now living in your household too. That all counts. And so it's a little bit different going into that holistic admissions process overall, but I always encourage students to apply for that first deadline. Any seniors, it's November 1, that early action deadline. I'm going to pop out to the next slide. We're passing the baton off to Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to make one last comment about academic preparation students, because I think sometimes when we do this presentation, it's like, I got to take calculus, I got to take calculus, I got to take calculus. Everyone freaks out. Students are evaluated in the context of their environment. If you have the option of accelerating and you are somebody that knows that you want to be a civil engineer, you've been dreaming about building boats or bridges or whatever for like all of your life, and you have the ability to maybe take a Saddleback class, you maybe have the ability to do a summer bridge program that allows you to accelerate, absolutely. But if you're a student that could only get to pre-calculus because of what was offered in your environment or circumstances, you will be evaluated based off of that. Did you maximize opportunity that was available to you? And I think that that's most important. Students really are evaluated in that context. And so I think, and the reason why I love having Purdue and ASU on this presentation is because students, you can see that you have holistic admissions, but there's also tons of programs out there that will automatically evaluate you based off of just your academic performance that are fantastic. I mean, if you look at the Purdue engineering and tech programs, ASU is one of the top 10, I think, for computer science in Silicon Valley. If I'm not wrong, so I believe it's like top 10 in terms of the college that the students, the graduates. I'm always butchering that phrase, but long story short, ASU is wonderfully easy in terms of knowing, are you going to be admitted or not? And it's also a fantastic place where students can go and get employed ultimately when they graduate. And so I think this how to prepare outside of high school is not only great for students wanting to have exposure to what does it mean to study STEM, but also to help them really think about, how do I be necessarily competitive, particularly for schools that do holistic admissions, right? I think the big thing I always like to tell students is do that experiential preparation. There's nothing worse, and this, by the way, goes for practically every major if you can. There's nothing worse than going into a collegiate environment with a program and showing up and realizing this is not at all what you wanted. Right. So if you do have access to maybe science or engineering summer programs and camps, maybe offered through your city or your local high school, the district, those types of opportunities, take advantage of them. Do you have a friend who maybe works in the lab that, is a family friend? Maybe go shadow them for a day. If there's an opportunity or program for high school students to maybe do a week's worth of, research experience in the summer, that's definitely something to consider applying for. If there are extracurriculars related to STEM at your high school, maybe, biology Olympiad, or, even just the physics club, or first robotics, those types of things. If there are competitions that maybe you like to tinker in your garage. But I also really want to emphasize informal activities. I think a lot of students believe that they have to join 29 different clubs that are STEM oriented at their high school in order to go to college. And I will tell you straight up, that is not, first off, don't be a joiner. You're not going to have time to do 29 clubs, quite frankly. You're not going to be able to do it really interestingly. But being able to there's so many different ways to demonstrate your passion for STEM. I had a student a couple years ago who was obsessed with all things space, but also really loved radios and understanding the communication. He really wants to kind of solve the telecom problems. Particularly, his goal is to ultimately bring Wi-Fi to parts of Africa that don't have fiber optic cable networks. And so one summer in his garage, his mother, I think, hated me for suggesting this. We talked about and brainstormed. He built a ham radio in his garage. He was able to talk to the International Space Station apparently twice, which I didn't know, by the way, was illegal. I thought the government would probably like shut that down. But no, you can actually, if you have the materials, you can call them up and they'll talk to you, I guess, if they pick up the phone. I had another student that was really passionate about biology, but couldn't necessarily get into a lab itself. Unfortunately, he lived in an area where he didn't have access to those types of things. So he and his grandfather worked in a greenhouse and they bred different Venus flytraps. And he ultimately managed to connect on Reddit, of all places, with people that love doing this kind of crossbreeding of plants. So I think, students, you don't necessarily have to join formal structures. If those are available to you and you want to do that, that's great. And they're absolutely pros to that. But also, it's okay to let your creativity run wild a little bit, obviously within safe measures. Please don't burn anything down, right? And I think it's also important as well to recognize that it's not just about, do you necessarily have these like checklist of classes and skills? Next slide, please, Monica. But I think it's also really important that, particularly for more competitive programs, they're looking for those soft skills. One of the things that I think is important to remember is that in STEM, you're at some point as a student going to hit challenges. And so looking at, is this a student that gave up? And that, by the way, can be viewed in a lot of different lenses. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a chemistry classroom. I can see that in a teacher letter of recommendation when they talk about something that happened with your, key club or CSF, right? Do you show persistence in the classroom, but also outside of the classroom? Are you really creative, particularly for engineers, right? We talked about the difference between engineering and engineering technology. Engineers are the people that are creating new solutions to problems to some extent. And so having that creativity, again, you may have it in an artistic way, but if I see evidence of it as an admissions officer, I know that I can probably mold that into other areas within the university context. Are you somebody that's patient? Guess what? Thomas Edison, he made like 1,000 different versions of the light bulb. I'm probably getting that wrong, right? There will be, especially if you want to do things in like science and math, there's a lot of trial and error with many of these things. And so again, that persistence, but also that patience, that willingness to continue to try again and know that it will take time. I always talk about teamwork. My sister is a hydrogen fuel cell engineer at Toyota, and she works with civil engineers, actually, because of the infrastructure that they need for hydrogen. She works with computer scientists. Oh my God, computer science and cars nowadays, it's crazy. She works with electrical engineers. She works with automotive engineers, pretty much any type of engineer you can imagine. I'm sure nuclear will be up next probably. And so understanding that skill, maybe you don't have time to do robotics team, but you're on the football team and you spend a lot of time. So you understand team dynamic and you're also really passionate about STEM. That is a fantastic, again, transferable skill set. The other thing I always like to say is you have to be comfortable with the unknown if you want to be a STEM student. There is so much out there, and that's kind of the joy, especially with things like science and math. And of course, engineering is you do get to create and you do get to learn. So is there that tolerance for ambiguity that exists? Because that's going to be a part of your educational journey, both in college and beyond. And so with that being said, I believe, Taylor, I am passing off to you to talk about some resources.
Of course, we do have tools, and there are tools out there to help students dive in to these ideas a little bit more. ASU has the Me3 game that if you just Google that, it pops right up. We've done it before. And the students get to essentially find a degree that fits them with their strengths, their weaknesses, as well as their interests. The majors at Purdue, I will actually have a visual on the next slide that I'll describe. And then College-Wise also has a guide to STEM, which is super helpful in diving into the specific kind of arenas of STEM and then the jobs. I think Nicole's done a great job throughout this whole presentation of explaining, like, yes, you can study this in the classroom, but this is what you can do with a career. And it's not going to be such a point A to point B that it's going to be a huge map and a lot of twists and turns that way. If you can go to the next slide, it'll show our major tool. If you just Google Purdue majors, this is what pops up. And I really enjoy this tool because students are able to narrow it by a career interest. So yes, you can click business/management. Of course, our Kreinert School of Management programs are going to pop up. There are 8 of them, but it'll also populate our financial planning, as well as our selling and sales management that are in our Polytechnic Institute. When Nicole was giving an example earlier of, oh, I want to be in business, but I don't like math. The Craner School of Management majors require Calc 1 and Calc 2. The two majors that I gave an example of that are in the College of Health and Human Sciences do not have a math requirement quite that high. So again, you can be interested in that realm, but again, kind of expanding those horizons a little bit. You can see even engineering and technology are listed together, and it'll pull those engineering technology programs in our Polytechnic Institute, as well as the College of Engineering programs as well. The environment and biology, pulling majors from the College of Engineering and the College of Science, and even our College of Agriculture, as our biochem program is housed there. And I know that this seems a little bit overwhelming, but there truly is ownership in taking the time to really truly learn about what these programs are like from a curriculum standpoint, doing your own research. And really, there are so many opportunities for students to study truly anything. We can also narrow those majors down by the academic college and then in alphabetical order as well. But if you could go to the next slide, of a fun career mapping visualization. And this divides students by the academic college and then the career cluster. So kind of some data of some postgraduate surveys of what arena students essentially found themselves in after graduating. It really is, the College of Engineering is our largest academic college at Purdue. And you can see a large amount of students are from the College of Engineering into the engineering career cluster, but you can see how students are also going to graduate school. They're going into manufacturing, they're going into business, they're going into transportation and those type of career clusters. So it's not just, I study biology, I can only be a biologist. I'm studying math, I'm going to be a mathematician. That the career direction truly can be an arrow pointing in 10 million directions, that these truly majors are opening doors and having students take advantage of the opportunities at the institution, whether it's doing research, whether it's talking to those professors after class. It's making sure that your communication skills are up to par when you have to give a presentation for an interview. That these are all things to think about, but it isn't such a binary, I studied this, so therefore this is the only thing I can do. I think this also goes in hand with the major of interest that students are wanting to study in college. I talk to a lot of students that are interested in engineering and think that they need to only spend their time being in the robotics club and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. That the life is truly interdisciplinary, and there is so much intersectionality mixed into our lives of the student volunteering with Surfrider, having that environmental engineering kind of in their mind. You think of somebody that has a job at Chipotle. Yes, they are probably not wanting to build burritos for the rest of their life, but they're gaining those soft skills of working with people, working on a team, being on time, having a boss. Of those skills truly can translate from one thing to another. If you want to go to the next slide, this is our contact information, Nicole, Sung, and myself. We'll leave this up there, but we do want to open the floor for some questions as we have about 12 minutes allotted left in this session. But we want to thank you for coming. We hope you learned a little bit more about STEM and diving into these ideas a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor, Sung, and Nicole. That was amazing. I can't speak for the students tonight, but I definitely learned a lot. So we're going to jump into the Q&A portion of this session. So students, families, attendees joining us this evening, if you can please submit your questions in the Q&A, that would be wonderful if you have any for our presenters this evening. In the meantime, I do have a question for all three of you that I get a lot from students who are interested in STEM. So one of the things that a lot of students run into is that the idea that these majors are competitive when they're applying. So what they tend to believe is that if they apply as a different major, they'll be admitted to a campus.
Ah, yes. Let's talk about that.
Yes, let's talk about that.
I have feelings. Okay. I see this a lot with students, and I think part of this is driven by the fact that there's kind of this belief sometimes that where you go will determine what your life looks like. First off, patently untrue. It has been proven time and time again in studies, and especially over the long term, that actually proves to be very false. Students, especially with engineering, the reality is the curriculum is very similar for many engineering programs. One of the things is if you start comparing major maps, you're going to see, especially with biology, you're going to take a whole series of chem, you're going to take a whole series of bio, you're going to take a whole series of physics. In engineering, you're going to be taking a whole series of math classes, physics, depending on the specific discipline. So I think to some extent, Monica, I always like to say to students, the name brandiness of the school in which you want to study engineering, it doesn't necessarily matter as much at the curricular level because it's so similar. That being said, I always hear those stories of kids that are like, okay, I really want to go to UCLA and I really want to study in the Sam Early School of Engineering. But you know what? I'm gonna put Renaissance studies as my major, and I'm gonna then transfer in as a computer science major internally because that's just so easy. Y'all, you can't do that. Okay. Part of the challenge is because there is so much demand, especially at the more selective institutions that we hear the names of all the time, that being able to internally transfer depending on the school is just not possible because there's not enough seats, right? There's only so much space in the lab classroom. So for instance, University of Washington, go Huskies, you cannot internally transfer for computer science there. You have to apply as a first year freshman. And if you don't get in, you have to either be an external transfer student or that's it. And spoiler, their admit rate for out-of-state students for CS last year was 3%. And so I think for students, this is where if you want to study STEM, I'm not saying don't apply to highly selective colleges. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm saying you need to do your research. You need to understand that especially with engineering, so much of getting employed at the big fancy name schools we know is less about where you went and more about what you did while you were there. My sister that I mentioned, she's the head of one of the big research groups for Toyota. She went to a college in Kettering University. They used to be the tech school for GM. She did co-ops at Daimler Chrysler. She did co-ops at Tesla. She did co-ops at Toyota. And so a lot of, especially with STEM fields, it's about your experiences that you have that are going to help you a lot. And so I think the internal transfer system, to get back to your question, Monica, is make sure students that you build your list strategically. Don't just pick schools based off of the name alone, because the ability to internally transfer will vary in terms of whether that's possible, but assume more likely than not, especially if it's a big state university, they're not necessarily going to have the capacity for that necessarily. But also recognize that great engineering educations can happen at a variety of schools of selectivity. And in fact, like I pick on ASU lovingly because it's such an incredibly accessible school where you can have those great experiences, but it's not necessarily going to be so crazy competitive. Sung, it sounds like you have something you want to add.
Yeah, I mean, the line that I always use is that the only time we talk about impaction at ASU is the impact you get to make after you graduate in 4 years. It's just the fact that when students put their mind to what they want to do, if they discover that passion, the biggest thing for us is that you have that academic preparation. And if we feel that you've done enough of that academic preparation, then we feel as a state university that it's our obligation to make sure that you have all the resources that you need to succeed. And so for us with ASU, you can come in as any engineering program that you want. Maybe you want to start off as a mechanical engineering major, but then even after you apply, if you wanted to change to computer science, you can do that. The requirements are the same for all of our programs. So you're not stuck even then to on just that one option. And even after you come to ASU, if you were coming in as a engineering major and then you wanted to switch to, say, physics, maybe the S part of STEM appealed to you more. Switching over is very straightforward. Being in good academic standing is the only requirement that you need. You just talk with your advisor, fill out a change of major form, and it's done. So I think the biggest thing for us is that if the student is willing to put in the work and the preparation, then our faculty, the resources that we have through our advisors and the abundance of students who are there to collaborate with one another, that are here to work together. They're not looking so much about competing against one another. It's more of that whole learning environment, being able to assist one another in getting to where they want to go. That's a big part of what we stand for as a university, and it's reflected in, I believe, in our requirements. There are no caps at all.
Specifically at Purdue, because all the programs are direct admit, I encourage students to apply to the program that they want the most. Because if they start in another program, it's not going to be guaranteed that a student would be able to change their major due to the popularity of our computer science, engineering, nursing, and professional flight program. Is there's a cap at the number of seats that we have available. And it's a very case by case basis. We actually we allow students to choose their top 2 majors, but not all majors are offered as a second choice. A great second choice is our exploratory studies program. That's for undecided students. And that's going to be the best kind of positioning point for a student to be able to change their major into any major, but especially some of those 4 more competitive programs. And I think from that, it's just not going to be guaranteed that a student will be able to end up in that program that they want due to the popularity. Some years we have space for 50 students. Some years we have space for 150 students for each semester of moving into a different program. So I would encourage students to email me as we go through this process, especially seniors. And a great example of this is the math requirements, and students in the College of Engineering are taking a different math than students in the College of the Polytechnic Institute for an engineering technology program, that they are not the same.
That's also a great question, Monica, for students to ask when they're building their college list is how, one, is this a school that admits by major? If not, where does the competition for major exist if it does? So for instance, like, what Sung was saying, ASU doesn't have capacity constraints. You can literally change your mind and it's totally fine. Whereas Taylor just mentioned, if you do decide that you want to switch majors, that's going to potentially be competitive, y'all. Different schools will have that. And oftentimes that has to do with resources. So if there's something that's really in demand, sometimes what happens is the competitiveness for that program, every student is maybe admitted to what's called pre-major status. This is common at UCs, for instance, where, okay, we can admit 300 kids, but at some point we only have room for 150. And so the performance in the first 2 years determines who gets to go ahead. And if you don't get admitted to that major, then you have to try again another quarter. And why does that matter for you STEM students? It means that you may have to delay graduation. So Monica, I think to kind of your question in terms of trying to backdoor into majors, it's really about students being a smart consumer on the front end and building your list strategically. Because if a school is competitive for those majors, the pain that you were trying to avoid is going to happen once you get there, and then it's an even more bigger mess. So ask the good questions ahead of time would be my advice.
Wonderful. So you all heard it here first. Choose the major that you're actually interested in. Make sure that you're doing your research about the campuses that you're interested in to find the better fit for you. So we have more questions in the chat. So feel free to type in your answers to our presenters. But also I do want to kind of address a couple of them live. So one question we got is, how important are SAT and ACT scores for California universities? I like to answer that, and I'll let our presenters, if they want to answer as well. But currently, our University of California schools, they are test blind. They're not looking at test scores. They're not considering test scores for admission through 2024. So the UCs are not going to be reviewing test scores at all, even if you submit them. For our Cal State schools, currently to our senior class, I don't know what class you're in, the student who submitted, or the person who submitted this question, but currently for our seniors, they are also test blind. They're not requiring test scores. They're not using test scores to review their admissions or their applications for admissions. But that could change for our juniors and following underclassmen. So I think that answers your question. I want to see if anyone else wants to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. If we're talking about California publics, if you are a senior that is applying to college this year, you're applying to a UC or a CSU, like you take them, and like if you report them on your application, they'll only be used for placement purposes should you decide to go to a UC.
Mm-hmm.
They will not be shown in the admissions process. The UCs legally cannot show those test scores in the admissions process. That was the result of a settlement that recently happened about 6 months ago. For the Cal States, the reason why they are only a year is because the governing system for the Cal States is a little bit different. So they got a waiver for a year. But, I would say if you're a younger student, you may want to consider taking the test just because it is likely, some of you may apply to private institutions or you apply to institutions outside of the state of California, especially considering how competitive a number of our institutions are becoming. But I always like to tell students, the transcript is always going to be more interesting to me, particularly if I am looking at STEM programs. I want to see how well did you do in those specific classes. I want to see how well are you doing in your math pathways. I want to see the rigor that you chose, because 4 hours on a Saturday is nothing compared to 4 years on a transcript. And so I think sometimes testing can be helpful. It can be certainly something that can be used, but I would encourage students to be thoughtful as to, especially if you're a younger student, how much time and energy do you want to dedicate towards testing as we start moving to a more test optional world? That would be kind of my advice, Monica, in that regard.
Yeah, and I also do want to add that we had a presentation about testing on Tuesday and this covered every aspect of how to approach testing now that we're in a different landscape with testing. So I encourage you to view that when it's available on our YouTube, but also meet with myself so we can decide whether taking a test is the right thing for you. So schedule those appointments on our website. Right now we're meeting with juniors and seniors, but coming in the spring, we're going to start meeting with all class levels. So I want to make sure that I honor our presenters' time. So I want to conclude this presentation. So I did put in the chat the copy of this presentation so you can have access to all those resources that our presenters today were generously offered to all of you. So I want to conclude by thanking our presenters, Nicole, Sung, and Taylor. This was a wonderful presentation, a wonderful way to end this 4-day event. This concludes this year's CUSD Virtual College Fair. I want to thank all of our students and families and community members joining us this evening. Thank you for being a great audience. And also thank you again to Nicole, Taylor, and Sung. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, bye. Bye-bye.